Hello, welcome to Sonic Lab. Today we're looking at a couple of things really. What I had here was the brand new kit, which is the desktop MS-20, which is sort of following on from the Korg keyboard version of the MS-20, but this is in the form factor of a desktop unit, and it sits really nicely flat, no keyboard, same sort of front panel, obviously missing the keyboard part, and well, the bulk of it really, but it's a really nice form factor this is. It's got wooden sides, it's got a nice flat surface, it's also got a few other additions. Before we go too much further, quick explanation of the setup I've got here. Obviously we've got the Korg MS-20 desktop kit. Now this is comes in kit form. You build it just like the MS-20 full version that we built a little while back. In fact, I think we built that and we did a time lapse of it. It took me about an hour and 20 minutes to build this one. It's actually quite a lot simpler than the keyboard version just because the case and stuff is a lot easier. You still have to do up a lot of those bolts, and so there's a lot of thumb and finger action. But I was also running that with the SQ1. The SQ1 is the sort of Volca style dual channel 8-step sequencer that comes with the kit in the same box. You can also buy this separately. I'm not going to be reviewing this, I'm going to be using it, but I'll review that in a separate issue. And finally, that was all going through this Eventide H9, which is a multi-effects pedal, which has pretty much all of the algorithms that Eventide currently make for their series of mod pedals and the like, all in one place. And as you heard, it sounds fantastically ambient, and there's a ton of space and jamming possibilities. In fact, I might stick some at the end just because I enjoyed that so much. But let's take a look at the synthesizer itself, because there are some differences in this version compared to your regular standard MS-20. First place to start looking really is on the patch panel. There are some differences here, and the most exciting one for me is pulse width modulation in. Those of you who know me will know that I love the sound of pulse width modulation, so I'm just going to run this little sequence here, which is a square wave on a single oscillator. Now I'm going to plug in LFO out into pulse width modulation in and crank it up a bit. We've got, there it is. So I can modulate it via the LFO or any other thing that I might want to patch into that pulse width modulation system. Hallelujah! I've been wanting this for such a long time. I think the actual fix for pulse width modulation, is quite convoluted and not something that me in a very poor understanding of electronics would be prepared to take on. So back to the patch panel. We'll unplug this for a second now and we'll take some of these guys out. The first of these is we've got an extra panel, a patch here. Well, actually this is replaced. This is VCO 1 and 2 control voltage in, but also in volt per octave. So we can control it via hertz volts and volts per octave. And now that is actually pretty cool. So now that means our MS-20 will talk Eurorack, which is a really big deal in terms of integrating it. Prior to this we might have had to have a separate module or some sort of converter. This is actually quite big news, but it's not all good news because there has been something sacrificed. Where this used to be, there was an input for the controlling of the voltage of VCO2 only, so we could run it individual oscillators to individual pitches, making it duophonic, and certainly when we're talking use of the SQ1, that meant we could have run double lines, and we sort of can. I was doing that on my intro sequence, but it's not quite the same. It's sort of one affects both, and then you can affect one as well, so you don't get true independence. That might be a problem for some of you, but I must say, when I was building this thing, there are a lot of patch points on the annotated on the circuit board, and one of them may well be the ability to do VCO2 separately. And the other thing that's very cool about this is, I don't know if you can see across the front here, that something else that's been changed is we've got mults across here. So we've got mults with an 1/8 inch in and then 3/4 inch out, but all along here are little blanking pot sort of caps for another 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14 what could be jacks, I suppose. That looks like exactly what they are, which I guess means if you want to do any mods, you don't have to drill the case. Speaking of mods, there are, as on the keyboard version, a few patch points marked on the circuit board. Here we've got the VCO1 modulation in, which is not on the patch bay, I don't think. VCO1 output, a separate output. Then we've got Rev2 high pass out and VCO2 out separately, Rev2 low pass out. And moving over here, we've got some VCA. I'm not quite sure what they are, but something to do with the VCA. Oh, and then we've got Rev1 high pass out and Rev1 low pass out, which looks like what that means is we can actually address the two filters separately at the same time if we bring them out to the patch bay. Moving over to the other circuit board, we've got some external input, not quite sure what they are. Nothing else, and then some VCA output here. So it doesn't look like we've got any means of controlling VCO2 as a CV input on this circuit board. Okay, so back to more differences. As you can see here, there's also a switch for Oscillator Sync. Now, that's something that the original didn't have, and that was one that was kind of very much, in demand. People said, oh, it'd be great if it had that. So let's just check that. I'll run my sequencer again. This is just my standard with a bit of pulse width, I might add. So now what I'm going to do is switch the sync on and bring in Oscillator 2. So you can hear now when I'm modulating the pitch of Oscillator 2. Means I can do some cool stuff with that. In fact, if I wanted to, I can modulate it from, let's say, the LFO. I think if I take the pulse width out and I go into I can modulate that separately, and that brings up another point, which is that we've also got this FM switch, which allows us to switch VCO1 to VCO2 in terms of modulation. So if I hit my sequence again, I've got pitch dialed up. Now if I bring this in, you can tell that this oscillator is now modulating the pitch of VCO2, and I can dial that in as much as I like. So again, these are kind of sounds that the original MS-20 couldn't make, basically, and now you can make them with the desktop MS-20. And I think actually that's really cool, because one of the things that, it kind of turns it into a different synthesizer for me, because, the ability to have pulse width modulation creates a whole new set of sort of timbres and FM as well. So I really like the fact that we've added that. There's also one other feature, which is the fact that we've now got switchable filter 1, Rev 2, Rev 1 filter types, switchable by the front panel. On the MS-20 Mini and the MS-20 desktop, it was a combination of keys and power on. With this now, we can switch them in real time, which for many people is very cool. So now if I just switch off those 4 steps and switch on a new set of steps, just so that we've got a slightly different sequence to run. There's a little bit of slide in there as well. This is filter 1. Start bringing the resonance in. When you really hear that screaming resonance that the MS-20 is so famous for, this is filter 1 type. Switch in filter 2. Rev 2 is definitely smoother. Let's just try that on the high pass filter. Rev 2. More aggressive. So you're hearing there, 2 different filter types which we can switch between them. I mean, I know there's going to be a lot of people who said, oh, it doesn't sound like the original MS-20, and it may well be true. It might not sound like your original MS-20. Bear in mind that, as I think I said in my previous reviews of the MS-20, the one I've got, 35 years old plus, electronics are going to be ever so slightly different. There were components they couldn't use in the manufacture of this one, but it's damn close, and this is brand new electronics. And that feature as well is very, very cool. So overall, I think what you're getting here is kind of essentially an MS-20 reimagined, with some of the things that people have been crying out for years of the original, in fact making their own modifications to allow for these kind of things. This is now built in to this little unit. And I think you know, that's something for me. If I was actually thinking about buying an MS-20, whatever, I might consider this, because I'm going to get more. I still get my original MS-20, okay, so I don't get the VCO2 CV, which may be an issue for some people, granted. But with this kit, I'm getting the SQ1 sequencer. We'll go into that in more depth in part 2 of this review, I think. But I just wanted to really give you a sense of what was different about the MS-20 itself. And I, for one, think, you know, for the money, I think it's about $1,700 for the SQ1, and the desktop kit works out around about 950 quid, something like that. So it's only a tiny bit more. I think you can still buy the keyboard kit if that's what you prefer. But I, for one, I really like this form factor. I think it's much more portable. Trying to get an MS-20 into a case is a nightmare. This will probably, no doubt, Korg will release some luggage for it, or you can find some luggage that will work. I guess one question that you might ask is, so what's stopping Korg from making a mini version of this MS-20? And that's a very good question, because I think the mini version would probably make more sense to a lot of people, purely because it's going to have mini jacks on the jack field, so you're going to be able to interface directly with the Eurorack, don't need to buy any extra leads. Obviously the kit is more attractive, it's got a better build quality, it's solid, it's larger, which, you know, some people just prefer that, but you are paying a premium for it. But to be perfectly honest, I think if I was going to buy an MS-20 of any kind at the moment, I don't think I would buy a vintage, I don't think I'd buy a keyboard, I think I'd buy the desktop version, just purely because those extra functions mean that it just makes more sense to me as a synthesizer, as an instrument, and it's more musical and more useful, I think, than the original.